Now, Declan, off you go.
Thanks, Fionnuala. Is that screen visible to everyone? There?
It is.
Great. Okay. So hello, everyone. Declan Riley is my name, and I work in Trinity College in the Disability Service. So I just want to say thanks to Fionnuala for asking me to present to you tonight on DARE and the transition to third level for young people affected by childhood cancer. So this slide presentation is cut down to about, I'm going to try and get through it in about 15 minutes. It's cut down from a longer presentation, which is available on the DARE website at accesscollege.ie. That's the Here and DARE website. And I just took the PowerPoint off of that web page and cut it down from something like 40 slides down to about 20. So there is additional information in the DARE, and it may come up in some of the questions, but a lot of the information that I cover or might briefly just go over is available on the website. And if there's a chance for questions afterwards, we might come back to some of those things that have been left out. So DARE stands for the Disability Access Route to Education. It's been going since 2010, and it's grown in the number of colleges. Practically all the colleges in the country offer places to undergraduate courses through DARE. So there's a list of all the colleges around the country. And basically, it's an admission scheme for school leavers whose disabilities have had a negative impact on their school level education. And it offers reduced points places, that's through the CAO, to school leavers who, as a result of having a disability, have experienced additional educational challenges in second level education. Second level meaning primarily 5th year and 6th year, the Leaving Cert. So anyone can apply if you have a disability and you're finishing school and you believe that you might not meet the points for your preferred course, or you believe it's having a negative impact on your performance in school, and the only other criteria is you have to be under 23 years of age in the year of your application. So for next year, you have to be under 23 as of January the 1st. The reason for that is because anyone over 23 is considered a mature student, and mature students have their own separate access route, which doesn't rely on the CAO points. So DARE specifically is an opportunity to get in below the points requirement. The disabilities eligible for consideration, there's 11 categories there. Those are just the broad headings. There's lots of those break down into smaller groups. I've highlighted significant ongoing illness because that's the majority of cancers would come under that. There would be some cases where it might also result in a physical disability, which I'll talk about as well in a few minutes. But the three that I've asterisked there, ADD, ADHD, mental health conditions, and significant ongoing illness, those are the only three in which a report or evidence of disability must be dated after February 1st, 2019. So in other words, it must be less than 3 years old. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. All of the other disability types, the documentation to provide evidence for your disability in the DARE application can be older than 3 years old. This slide isn't in the presentation. I just made this up in relation to, I suppose, my experience of looking at documentation for people who've had cancer in the past, and based on what the DARE criteria are looking for. These are the cancer types that are kind of illustrative only. I haven't tried to be exhaustive in including every cancer type, but like all cancers can be or have been provided evidence in applications from an oncologist or a pediatric oncologist. And then any kind of surgery that results in cancer treatment that results in surgery, the surgeon who provides the surgeon who carried out the surgery can provide the evidence. And then similarly with treatments by through chemotherapy, it could be a medical oncologist, or cancers treated by radiation therapy, it could be a radiation oncologist. And then I've included some of the other ones there. So it doesn't, I'm not saying it has to be any of these particular cancer specialists, but it's fine that if it is. So for example, a bowel cancer, a gastroenterologist can provide the evidence. That makes sense. And similarly with the blood cancers, lymphoma, leukemia, a hematologist may provide those. But like I said, it could be just simply a pediatric oncologist for any of them, and that's also fine. So this may generate questions, but I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So the way the DARE works in terms of an application is that in order to be DARE eligible, you must meet the educational impact criteria. That's evidence from the school, and you must provide evidence of disability. And if you do both of those things, then you should be made DARE eligible. You must, as it says there, you must meet both the DARE educational impact criteria and the DARE evidence of disability criteria. So that changed about 5 years ago. It used to be you just had to provide evidence of disability, and they added in the educational impacts about 5 years ago. The educational impacts, you need to meet 2 out of the 6 criteria. You need to either have intervention or supports in post-primary school. It needs to either have impacted on your attendance or regularly disrupted your school day, or it may have had to affect your school experience or your well-being. It may also have impacted your school learning or your exam results, and it may have caused other educational impacts. So for anyone applying under most of the disability categories, you need to meet 2 out of those 5 criteria. And then there's a 6th criteria for anyone who's applying with a specific learning difficulty. If you have been educationally impacted and the school is aware of it, it's usually not difficult to provide evidence to meet the criteria for DARE. The criteria is quite easy to meet for anyone who has had a significant impact in school. The benefits of DARE, like I said already, you potentially can get a reduced points for a course. So there's an example given there of a course that's 366 points, but a DARE applicant might only get 356 points. So they may get an offer. If they're DARE eligible, they may get an offer if they're 10 points short, for example. So the amount of points a particular course is reduced by is dependent on the number of places on the course, the number of reserved DARE places on the course, and then the number of applicants competing for those reserved places. So some courses might not have a lot of applicants or might not have a lot of DARE eligible applicants. So the point reduction could be quite large. In other courses that are very popular, which has a large number of applicants, including a large number of DARE applicants, the point reductions could be quite small because there's so many people applying. It might only go to somebody who's 5 or 10 points below. And then the reduction points for DARE places can vary from year to year. Some years it could be 10 points, the next year it could be 20 or 30. There's really no way of knowing because of the additional factors there about how many people are eligible and who are applying for it. The benefits of DARE is that you are known to the university you're going to right at the start from round 1 of the CAO. And that means you're probably going to be invited to orientation programs. You're going to be offered learning support, potentially have some assistive technology or library supports, have exam accommodations, if needs be, additional support like an education support worker or academic tuition. Those are the kind of supports that students may avail of. And you don't have to be eligible for DARE to get the support in the university. So even if you apply for DARE and for whatever reason you're not eligible, that doesn't mean if and when you go to 3rd level that you can't avail of supports. You don't have to be eligible for DARE in order to get the supports that you might need in university. And the supports are dependent on a needs assessment that is conducted to identify your support requirements. That's usually a one-to-one meeting with somebody like me, a disability officer, that might last anything from half an hour to an hour. And if needs be, there could be additional meetings and referrals to other support services as well. So to apply, you need to apply by February 1st initially in the year of application. You should read through the DARE handbook. There's hard copies available, sent out to all schools. And there's also a PDF of it on the DARE website. You need to initially complete section A, which is a series of questions, by March the 1st. And you should, as soon as you can, try and start gathering your documentation. And you need to complete the educational impact statement with your school and your evidence of disability. That's parts B and C, and send them to the CAO by the 15th of March. So those are the three sections: Section A, B, and C. Section A is an online application to the CAO by the 1st of February. Some questions to answer online, and then you have until March 15th to get the school to assist you to fill in Section B, the educational impact statement, and to get your evidence of disability from a medical team to the CAO by the 15th of March. And the educational impact statement really is an opportunity for your school to demonstrate how your disability is impacted on your second level education. And that's a form that you fill in with your school, and you have to sign it, and it's your responsibility. The applicant should sign it and send it in. Don't rely on the school to send it in on your behalf. And then the important thing about the evidence of disability is you really need to get a medical specialist or consultant to fill that in. There is a thing called a GP verification, but that's really where your GP fills in the form, but includes documentation that they have on file from the consultant. So you're not going to the consultant for the evidence, you're going to your GP for it. They fill in the evidence of disability form, but you must provide the documentation that the GP has on file for you in relation to your cancer diagnosis or cancer treatment. That's one of the things that a lot of people sometimes miss out on. They just get the GP to fill in the form and they don't provide the additional documentation. So really helpful tips there are to study the handbook carefully. If you're not familiar with DARE, the first time you're reading about it, it can take a while to kind of understand how it works. Initially, it can seem quite complicated. So it's probably best to start early. Now is a really good time. Read through it, ask questions. There's in January, there's advice clinics held throughout the country where you can go and discuss your particular application with advisors. But you should really start to talk to your school and seek the documentation around now. And over the next few weeks before Christmas, try and get as much of it planned out as possible, and so you're not leaving everything till January, because February 1st comes around very quickly when January is upon us. Like I said, some of the mistakes that are often encountered by applicants is they don't get the evidence of disability right because they get the GP to fill it in, but the required copy from the appropriate professional confirming the diagnosis is not provided. Another factor is reports out of date, or reports not confirming the diagnosis of a condition. And sometimes that's easy to overlook, particularly if somebody's had a very long history. There could be, a huge amount of documentation, but it can be very medical. And it's simpler just to provide it in a single letter or in a form. And obviously the applicant and the family and anyone involved in the medical treatment is aware of the full impact. But when you're filling it in on the form, simple thing like leaving out the diagnosis could be a factor in an applicant not being made eligible, because the person screening the application will only see what's in the application form. And it is best just to fill in a single evidence of disability form or a couple of very clearly worded letters, rather than sending in reams and reams of medical documentation that might not have exactly what the application is looking for, which is a clear diagnosis and what the date of onset was and what the treatment was, for example. So other factors are incorrect professionals completing the report, or test details missing, or who conducted the test. So those are a reminder there of the timelines. February 1st initially to apply online, and then you need to get your documentation in by the 15th of March. And you get a notification in late June to tell you whether you're eligible or ineligible. Ineligible applicants can apply for an appeal or a review in July. And then the DARE here offers happen in round one, along with the CAO round one offers in August. And then all college orientations happen from late August to early September. Just to talk briefly then about what sort of supports are available at third level. Like I said, you have a needs assessment that takes into account the impact of a disability and how it impacts you. If you apply to DARE, even if you know, an applicant or a person has either recovered or has improved significantly, they're still obliged to register with the service and meet with a disability officer just so that they're fully informed about what's available. They don't have to have any of these things, but they do have to go through a needs assessment. It's one of the terms and conditions of applying to DARE, that if you get a place in university or college through DARE, you do have to have a needs assessment. But like I said, it's a fairly brief meeting, and if you feel you don't need any supports, then that's fine. But you may very well need some of those supports that are mentioned there. Some of the things that are particularly useful for people who may experience impacts such as intermittent health around things like fatigue or nausea or recurring hospital appointments is, you know, flexibility on attendance or exam deadlines or assessment deadlines, and then places to go to rest, like such as having a respite space. And so the disability services in most colleges, or the access office, is really the place to kind of get that organized and get that sorted. A lot of colleges as well, and Trinity is no different, have occupational therapy supports that are provided to students, so they can meet with an occupational therapist on a regular basis throughout their time in college if they feel they need that level of support. And all of the access or disability services are funded by the European Social Fund. So there is money available to pay for technology or, if needed, additional personal support like a personal assistant or academic supports, for example, as well. So if you need to find out more information, those are the three websites I'd suggest you look at. ahead.ie is the access to higher education and disability. That's a good website to get an overall sense of how access works in higher education in Ireland. accesscollege.ie is the website I've based this presentation off of, and that has a lot of additional information which I haven't covered this evening, but hopefully I've covered the main points. And that tells you a little bit about here and there. Here is the higher education access route for applicants who are applying from either DESH schools or other socially disadvantaged areas. And then our own website in Trinity, to be a bit biased from my point of view, there's a lot of information there that's quite useful. It's what I know best, and we do know there's a lot of good information on that. So if you want to go and have a look at what a disability service support service looks like, I'd recommend you have a look at that one there. So that's it. I will take questions if there are any, if we have time through the chat, if there's any, Fionnuala. But if anyone wants to email, for example, either me or even the disability service in Trinity, they can just email askds@tcd.ie. I won't be there after this Friday. I'm actually going to a new role, but there'll be somebody replying to those emails. That's our public inquiries email address. So anybody can who sends in a question there will get a response.
Thanks a million, Declan. I think we got you just in time then, didn't we, for this presentation? Thanks so much for that. I think it was really informative, gave a really good overview for people who might not have any familiarity with it yet. There was a couple of questions coming in on the chat, some of which you addressed. Would a GP letter suffice? You have addressed that. But would a psychologist be able to provide that medical information that you mentioned is necessary, or I can't remember what you called it, confirming diagnosis?
No. So in their website, there's a list of appropriate professionals for certain areas. Mostly the professional areas will keep within their own area. So a psychologist, if asked, probably isn't going to be providing, medical documentation for specifying cancer, for example. But sometimes if somebody is in psychotherapy or attending a psychologist for counseling or psychotherapy, they will ask for that, and they will, sometimes it'll get mentioned in the letter. And similarly, a GP would do the same. And that's why we can't include it, because it doesn't include the official diagnosis. So the criteria in DARE are based on the fact that it's a highly competitive process, that applicants are applying for reduced points. So it has to have, I suppose, a set of standards that people can stand over and verify. So that's the reason for letters outside of a specialty area not being accepted for other disability categories. A psychologist is fine for dyslexia or other mental health difficulties or ADHD, for example. It's listed on the DARE website what the psychologist can provide evidence for.
Okay, thanks for that. Somebody also had a comment about their child's not doing any higher level subjects, but I presume that DARE is there for students at any level, or whatever their desired course is.
Yeah, so the DARE operates right across the CAO points bands, if you like, from the very highest points requirement down to the very lowest. So as long as you're applying for courses that you want to do, and realistically you're applying for courses that you have some chance of getting onto, if you think it might be within 50 or 100 points based on what subjects you're doing and what standard you're at, then by all means apply for it. And you don't have to be doing honours subjects to get a place through DARE or to get through the CAO. You do have to matriculate, or you do have to pass the Leaving Cert, and you do also have to meet the minimum entry requirements. If there's a language requirement or a maths requirement, for example, you have to meet that as well. But you can go into any course potentially in the country. Yeah. I think you're on mute there, Finola.
Thanks. Sorry, I could hear all hell breaking out downstairs, so I put myself on mute just in case. Do you find the number of places for DARE applicants is fairly distributed among all courses, or do the very popular courses have lesser places? I think you kind of addressed that at the beginning. There's the number of criteria, or the number of factors involved in influencing it.
Yeah, I mean, the CAO points are actually largely dependent on how popular they are as choices. So the higher the points, the more people are applying for it. So the points, the DARE places are fairly well distributed by the size of the course and the popularity of it. Every year in Trinity, there's a handful of courses that don't end up with DARE applicants because they might be only a course with 10 or 20 places on it, and it just happens that particular year nobody applied, or somebody who was offered didn't accept the place. But they're fairly well distributed, yeah.
Okay. It's not a question that's come in through the chat, but I suppose I was just wondering about the date of onset of your significant illness being within the 3-year window. I can see from some of the comments that people put in the chat at the beginning that obviously their diagnosis would fall outside of that. How do people, what's available to them in that case?
Okay, so the date of onset doesn't have to be within the 3-year window. What has to be within the 3-year window is the documentation.
Okay.
So as long as the documentation doesn't refer to historical diagnosis and historical impact. So let's say, for example, somebody from the age of 5 to 10 had cancer and was significantly impacted by cancer. And then by the time they got to secondary school, they were largely not impacted. And they went through secondary school, and then they decided to apply for DARE, went back to their oncology unit, and then got somebody to fill in the form to say, even though it's within date, like it's written like a month ago, if it's evident that the onset and the course and the impact of the cancer was 5-10 years ago, then they wouldn't be eligible, because it has to be relatively current. I think I was saying to you before, Fionnuala, that the date of the onset is not the criteria, it's the date of the documentation. And as long as the impact is shown to have occurred during the Leaving Cert cycle, which is 5th year and 6th year, then that should meet the criteria for eligibility. One other important factor is that if somebody, due to the impact of cancer, resulted in a physical disability, they could apply under the physical disability category, and then there wouldn't be a date requirement, and they'd also be prioritized because physical applicants are prioritized above other applicants because of there's an underrepresentation of people with physical disabilities. So if somebody had an amputation, for example, they could apply as a physical disability applicant, and they wouldn't. That if that happened when they were younger, they're still obviously experiencing the impact of that. And the other part of it is the school obviously should be able to evidence the impact in 5th and 6th year as well.
Question there, what about long-term late side effects? So, you know, what you're saying is once those have been documented, that's the most important thing. And I suppose what I take from that is maybe it's important for parents to be having a conversation with the consultant that's signing off on this, so that they're not just flicking through a form, quickly filling out dates, you know, that there's a conversation happening on how to make this as successful as possible.
It's good to be trying to create a narrative in the application that shows, you know, what the onset was, what the diagnosis was, what the course of the treatment was, and what's most current and anything ongoing. And it doesn't have to be hugely detailed, but it just has to cover, you know, what happened, what was it, how did it impact, and, you know, how recent is it? And if people are looking at those questions, the applicant themselves, they get to write a personal statement, and if the school are considering that, if the forms are filled in correctly, that picture does come across, you know, loud and clear when people take the time to fill it in. It's when it's kind of rushed and it's just taken for granted that it'll all just work out and people don't really check the stuff. That's when people can miss out on getting DARE eligibility, because the information is too brief. Not enough information is provided.
That's great. Thanks a million, Declan. There'll be time again at the end if anyone else has any questions that we didn't get to or that you haven't asked yet. Lucy, I'm going to introduce you again because I didn't press record the first time when I did my introductions. So we'll hear from Lucy Cronley now in a moment. Lucy has over 30 years experience in the area of social work. She's also
social care.
Social care, sorry. She's also parent to Owen, who's a childhood cancer survivor and has just started this year in Maynooth University. Excuse me. So Lucy has experience of applying through DARE for Owen, and he is linked in with Disability Services in Maynooth. So thanks a million, Lucy, for joining us.
Okay, thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm coming at this as a parent and not from a research perspective, so I'm owning all of what I have to say this evening and just hoping that it might be useful for people in terms of an application for DARE and looking at, you know, kind of how it may be useful to prepare young people for DARE. And I suppose Owen was diagnosed in 2013. So we've been dealing with the cancer diagnosis and the impact of that since 5th class in school up until this year, where he's now in 1st year in Maynooth. And I suppose to look at it from the perspective of a diagnosis of cancer has a huge impact on a young person moving into independence. You know, if they are hit with the diagnosis in their teenage years, it can actually stymie their move to independence, and they spend a lot of time with parents, they spend a lot of time with, you know, in hospital and away from their peer group. So it changes their journey through education very much. And it's looking then at what it changes about their journey through education and what supports need to be put in place. And I think sometimes as parents, we strive to keep things as normal as possible, moving them through the education system. And one of the things I think is very important to consider is to look at what supports are available to our young people going through the education system, and to look at getting them in place as soon as possible to actually scaffold our young people going through the education system. And I think it also then can give a better picture, as Declan was talking about, a better picture of how they've made their way through the education system and what supports they've need to actually get them through. I think there can be, and we experienced a reluctance to acknowledge that support was needed moving into third level, because it was a case of, you know, having the label of the kid with cancer, that like Owen really wanted to move away from that label and move into independence and move into life being back to normal. So I think that was one of the first kind of pieces that we had to kind of get over and get through, was actually looking at how everything was impacted in terms of school. And then a conversation around trying to process out what I was worrying about as a parent and what he was worrying about as a child going through the education system. I think it's a useful place to start in terms of looking at what supports are going to be need to be put in place. And I think that, you know, sometimes in our struggle to kind of try and keep life normal, try and keep them going to school as much as possible, we can actually cause ourselves more stress. So one of the things I'd suggest is to look at connecting with the school to avail of support and to arrange a direct line of communication with the school, with the year head or the class tutor or the homeschool liaison in secondary school, to look at managing their way through secondary school and to look at what can be put in place then. I think it's very important to note school attendance and how school attendance is progressing through second level, because I think that can give information as well as they're moving along. I think looking at home tuition as a support, and I think sometimes people can say, well, I'm not going to get a home tutor, it's impossible to get a home tutor. I think even going through the process of applying for a home tutor, having it seen as a need is important as well, in terms of what supports are needed to get your child through second level and the impact on that. And home tuition is available. I mean, children going through cancer treatment in second level can get like 5 to 7 hours of home tuition a week, and that can make a massive difference. And having all the supports in place in terms of whatever may be available, resource, home tuition, connecting in with the homeschool liaison, all of those different things can actually give a better picture to understand what's going to be needed long term for support. And as I said, I think sometimes our strive to get back to normal after treatment can sometimes get in the way when so much has changed for our children, when they've had a life-changing experience of going through cancer. So I think it's more useful to look at, you know, what do they need in place to move forward, rather than looking at getting back to normal. I think that can be more useful. In terms of gathering information as they're going through secondary school, I do think that's a crucial piece. You know, keeping a record of school attendance, and I think keeping a record of what's been partial days as well as what's been full days and how that's been managed through school, I think is very important. And it also saves then having to gather it all at the end when you realise that's what you need. Knowing what you need to gather in advance, I think, is useful. So, and as well, keeping a record of all the supports that are in place, be that technology support, resource, home tuition, exam accommodations, and also keeping a record of the reports that you've used to get these in place. Like, for example, using an OT report to get technology supports in place. That's useful then to have when you're making the DARE application. And I think to get the supports in place as soon as possible, to look at the impact on ability to concentrate in school. And I think keeping a record of how that impacts as well as you're going along through secondary school is much more useful than trying to remember at a later point. So again, it's just that gathering information in preparation for looking at DARE. I think that connecting with the school to avail of the support and to arrange, like I said, the direct line of communication is very important. And I think trying to make your own decision about school attendance, you know, be it full days or part days based on your child's circumstances and ability, not pushing them beyond what they're able to do, I think gives a better picture then of what they may need in terms of moving forward. Then I think as well, you know, keeping a record, like I said, of all of the attendance pieces as well, for them, and keeping that as they're moving along. And one note in that is that if you're applying for home tuition every year you have to fill in a part of the home tuition, which is the impact on education. And it also has to be signed off by hospital, and it also has to be signed off by the school. So that actually gives you a good record of attendance and of impact on education if you apply for that each year. Then looking at applying for DARE, it's, you know, I think I would suggest looking yourself as a parent at it, first of all, to look at, do they meet the criteria? Because one of the conversations that was a little tricky to have was looking at Owen, who was out of treatment, and then looking at applying for the disability access route to education. I think he found that very difficult, saying to me, I don't have a disability. So it's looking at actually, you know, having good information yourself, having some familiarity with it yourself, and then to look at really, it's about a pathway to support rather than focusing on the disability aspect of it for a child who's trying to move away from a cancer diagnosis. I thought that was something that was important. Then looking at the supports that are availed of in second level, they can be replicated through the DARE and sought through DARE as well. So actually not looking to keep things as normal as possible for kids, but realistically acknowledging what are the supports that they need, getting them in place, and then looking to move them on to third level with kids as well. I think it's useful to look at speaking to the guidance counsellor in school around the DARE application, because they do DARE applications every year, and they're very good at looking at what information you need to gather, what needs to be put in place, how you meet the criteria, and they're very helpful in terms of doing that. And it's back to what Declan was saying about looking at getting the support letter from the hematologist or oncologist and the consultant involved to look at the primary disability, which cancer can be cited as, but then to look at the GP then putting a more rounded picture of what you've actually been dealing with post-diagnosis in place. So I think the two can go in tandem, because as well, like we're also dealing with kids that are kind of 17, 18 age group. And with that age group, they're moving on from Crumlin and moving on from paediatric services into adult services. So sometimes you can wonder, where do I actually go with this? So my suggestion would be to look for the primary disability and a letter of support from the oncologist or hematologist there, but then again to look at the GP being able to round out that picture of what you're dealing with in terms of illness. The experience of writing up a personal statement, I think, was one that Owen wanted to do very much on his own. He didn't want me to see that. So in discussing that, we looked at actually who was the best person to help him write up that personal statement. And sometimes it's not parent, it can be somebody outside of the parent, because he didn't really want to talk to me about how he saw some of that impact. And I think that's an acknowledgement of, you know, moving into a more adult space and wanting to take on his own independence in that as well. And I think speaking with the guidance counsellor in school in terms of what they can offer and what supports they can put in place, I think is crucial in gathering all the information. I'd advise parents to read the DARE handbook and familiarise yourself with the process. And as Declan was saying, it can seem a little bit daunting at first, but actually when you break it down into smaller chunks, it's much easier to manage. And like I said, guidance counsellors in school, I think, are a really useful person to engage in the process. Then apply. When I was actually showing Owen what I was going to talk about this evening, one of the things that he felt was very important to share was that the applying for DARE is a completely confidential process that nobody knows except the student and the DARE office what accommodations are going to be in place. That it's so nobody else will know unless they disclose that information. It's a completely confidential application, so that can actually sometimes stop kids from wanting to apply through the service as well. So just to know that. And I think that, you know, DARE is a support that can enhance our children's experience in third level. It can give them a network of support that they can access and control themselves in an adult world, because one of the big changes I feel with young people moving from second level into third level is that third level don't in any way engage with parents, that kids themselves actually negotiate their way through third level, because the majority of the time they're actually over 18 and they are deemed an adult at that point as well. So I suppose that's my contribution. I hope it's in some way helpful. I have notes from this as well, if it's useful to anybody at some point as well.
Thanks a million, Lucy. You know, I'm sure people found that really, really helpful. I certainly did. And thank you so much for your contribution and for Owen's contribution as well. It was great to hear from him on it too. There's lots in there. I suppose one of the main things being to keep the communication channels open, both with your child and with the school, and keep that going from early on. So I suppose that's really helpful for people who are further back in the process, maybe, you know, a few years ahead of time. One question that came up, Lucy, was, is home tuition available if the child has finished treatment? I don't know if you know that.
It depends on, like, I would have applied for home tuition right through from 5th class right up until 6th year. And it was provided based on attendance at school and the impact of illness. So Owen would have had lots of ongoing issues. So it's really based on whatever issues are coming up for a child. But that's where I think it's important when you're looking at attendance in school to look at partial days as well as, you know, days that are missed in school, because that distinction is quite important when you're looking at gathering supports and applying for home tuition.
Yeah. And I think that preparation, you know, Mary Claire, I know that's something that you would agree with, that level of preparation that's necessary, that it's not falling on your shoulders just in 6th year when everything else, you're trying to manage so much else going on as well. So I think that's really good advice. Niall, we lost you there, but you're back. I was just about to call on Mary Claire in your place, but you're back. So once again, I'll just introduce Niall again. So Niall Farrell, childhood cancer survivor. Niall is, why do I have to look at this every time? Deputy Consul General in the Irish Consulate in Frankfurt. You're obviously here in a personal capacity, but your job sounds very cool, so we have to mention it. So Niall, I know you have a lot to say based on similar to what, you know, what Lucy has experienced with Owen, and obviously you're further down the line. So we're looking forward to hearing about your own experiences. Thanks a million. Are you frozen, Niall? Niall got kicked off there a minute ago, so he might just be having a connection issue. I'll just give it a sec. Mary Claire, we can go to you next if Niall can't get back on. Yeah, we might do that, Mary Claire. Is that okay? And it'll give Niall a chance to sort out his Wi-Fi connection.
Sure. And
Mary Claire, yeah, I'm going to share your slides. Sorry.
just
Sorry.
okay. Now I've lost.
Yep, here we go.
Okay, let me just. Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Fionnuala, for all your work, and thank you for the contributions of the speakers to date. I just to give a little bit of background. My daughter Alice, who's now 19, she was diagnosed with a myeloid leukemia when she was 10. Back in 2013, she was in treatment for two and a half years, around the same time as Lucy's son Owen. She was just finished her treatment before she started in secondary school, so I always considered that the timing was good. Now, I suppose one of the issue, I think the next slide, Fionnuala, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know a lot of the speakers already have spoken around these issues, but I suppose I just want to summarize what I see as from Childhood Cancer Foundation, what we see some of the challenges that families face when they are navigating the DARE process. I think the first one is the lack of awareness of the impact of adolescent and young adult cancers, we refer to as AYA cancers, on education. The second is that we found that there was a lack of services to assess this impact at school and to put in place required supports and resources to support the AYA. In my own particular case, I suppose Alice wanted to leave cancer behind her. She wanted to start in secondary school with nobody knowing anything about her medical history. She just wanted to move on and move away from it. Now, she was still regularly attending Crumlin for different appointments, different procedures, and the further we were out of treatment, the less frequently we had to attend Crumlin. And her very last clinic would have been just last April when she was 18 and a half. So I suppose I was happy that she was back at school, but in hindsight, I know and I feel that I should have been doing an awful lot more. I feel that I should have been more on the ball. I should have had more communications with the school to see exactly how was she really doing, because now obviously a lot of this was impacted by COVID, and homeschooling really wasn't suitable for her because she was kind of left to her own devices, and things came to a head in the first term of sixth year when just everything, she became completely overwhelmed by the work, by the timetable, and by everything that was required of her. So I at that point I started looking at DARE. And I think it's so important to be looking at DARE, as Lucy said, at a much earlier stage. So there's a great need for better signposting of DARE and the HERE programme also at an earlier stage of secondary school, so that you can allow for early intervention, to allow for assessments and resources to be put in place. In sixth year, we've got fantastic support from she was the vice principal at the time, and it was the school that alerted me to the fact that there were problems, and it had come to a head. So we sat down and we started looking at these and how we could deal with it. But had I known earlier about DARE and the whole, not just about the DARE, about the whole process of DARE, if I had read the handbook earlier, if I'd seen all of the different eligibility criteria, all of the different assessments, all of the different medical evidence, I feel that I would have been more prepared for dealing with DARE. So I think early knowledge of it is key. But I didn't know, for example, that there was such a thing as a handwriting speed test. So when Alice completed that test, it showed that her handwriting speed was extremely slow. Other tests were done and her reading speed was extremely slow. So, and I know this is slightly deviating from the category that a lot of childhood cancer parents will rely on, which is a significant ongoing illness. But as Lucy pointed out, that you may be relying on the category of significant ongoing illness and getting your report from Crumlin, but you may also be relying on other categories also. So we went and got an educational assessment report, which it was very, very comprehensive and highlighted and detailed all of the issues that were there. So we relied both on the report from Crumlin, which was the significant ongoing illness, but remembering that we were out of treatment now for at least 5 years. And I wasn't confident, because we hadn't accessed a lot of services throughout secondary school, that she would be given eligibility for DARE on that report alone. So we went the educational assessment, which dealt with such issues with comparing different CAT tests from 2000 and 2015, when she would have been in treatment, which showed that there was a significant deterioration in her results, in her educational attainment results during that period. And one of the participants tonight has asked about late effects. An awful lot of work is being done on late effects, but an awful lot more is needed, because more research is needed into what are the late effects. We know that chemotherapy and radiotherapy has, and the toxicities of treatment has long-term effects for children with cancer, and many of those effects don't even become apparent until many years later. So it is important that you would rely on all the different reports that you can access. But that was just in our particular circumstances. So what we have been doing is, and I think we can move to the next slide, Fionnuala. So can you move to the following one, and I'll go back to that one. With Childhood Cancer Foundation, what we have been doing is working with the National Cancer Control Programme, advocating for inclusion of eligibility criteria for AYA patients in DARE. What we have been working for and with the NCCP is to explain how cancer affects children's education, both primary and following on into secondary education and following on into third level, cognitive defects, slow processing speeds, etc. Children who've had radiotherapy to their brain and spine, it has can have very, very serious effects on their education in the past, missing school, and their education going forward. So what we want is, and we've asked for, and we've sat down with the Irish Universities DARE Steering Committee on the 12th of October, and we've set out the challenges, we set out the benefits of inclusion of automatic eligibility criteria for AYAs who have had cancer. So we want another box, an appropriate box for parents of AYAs with cancer to tick, so that it will make the application for DARE process a lot more streamlined and straightforward for them. And we've also written recently to the Minister for Education, Simon Harris, and to Norma Foley, Minister for Higher Education, Simon Harris, and Minister for Education, Norma Foley, requesting their support and assistance in effecting the requested changes. And this letter was supported and co-signed by the Irish Cancer Society, by Canteen Ireland and Can Care for Living. So I just want to say this is what we've been doing to try to improve the situation and make the DARE process easier and more straightforward for childhood, for adolescents and young adults who have had cancer and who have difficulties in accessing DARE because of a substantial period of time has elapsed since they have technically finished treatment. So can I just go back to the last slide, Fionnuala? So, sorry, we just talked about the challenges. We also set out for the DARE Steering Committee and the benefits of including eligibility. And I know both Declan and Lucy have touched on these and have spoken about them. So it was to alleviate the challenges, and it will encourage young people who have had or have cancer to look at DARE as a viable option to access third level, so that the reduced points would allow them to pursue their preferences higher than their points would permit them, or in cases where they may not even have thought that they could apply for a university or a third level institution place at all. It will also make the system a lot fairer and there will be more equity of access to education, and will also improve AYA survivors' career opportunities. And I think once we hear from Niall, he's a huge advocate of the DARE programme and how it worked for him. And it would also, and Lucy spoke about this very eloquently, it will also improve the psychological and emotional well-being of adolescents. They've been through so much and continue to deal with the side effects of cancer going forward. So the DARE and the HERE programs, they'd hear if a survivor is eligible for that, will enable them to thrive with the supports offered by the college disability offices. And just to finish there on the DARE HERE summary report, there's approximately 20 to 30 young people every year who apply for DARE. Now that's a very, very small number in the context of 4,012 successful DARE applicants in 2020. So I think our ask is a very important ask. And we're hoping, we haven't received any feedback from it yet, but it's to improve the lot of adolescents and young adults and adults with cancer. And I just one or two very quick kind of practical points. And I know Declan went through the DARE booklet. I think that the most important thing for parents is to get their hands now on this DARE booklet and to print it off or to get the hard copy. I'm looking at my one from last year. I have lines everywhere. I've highlighted bits. I've NB beside things because it's so important that the timeline is critical and the time limits are critical. And there's a very helpful help desk for DARE. And there's also a telephone number, but just not to leave things until the very last minute, because that DARE form must be in by the deadline by post in, I think it's still in Galway, Declan, you correct me if it's wrong, but it's by post. So there's a lot of information to be gathered. And it's also so important to have filled out the correct sections and to show that you are applying for DARE at an early stage. So the timeline, the booklet is extremely good, it's very well laid out, but it needs a bit of studying and just to highlight and be very, very careful about your deadlines. And also just one other thing, there once the AYA's Access College, and also, there's so many supports there that are available, and even down to, there are DARE places reserved in college on-campus accommodation for DARE applicants, which again is very, very helpful for AYAs who are living kind of far away from home, and they really need all the supports that they can obtain at college. So where my daughter Alice is at NUI Galway, I'm not getting an awful lot of information, Declan, about what's going on there, except I hear about an awful lot of, there's a lot of socializing going on, but she would not be there was it not for DARE. Was it not for the support of our school, and for also the support of other parents like Lucy and other parents who I was able to engage with, who were able to really pass on information between each other and to assist parents in the actual the application process. So thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Mary Claire, for that. There's a couple of questions come in that haven't been answered, but I'm going to come back to them at the end if that's okay. I just really want people to hear from Niall, and I'm kind of conscious that people might start dropping off in another 10 or 15 minutes. So we'll hear from Niall, and then I'll come back. I've made a note of the questions that haven't been answered, and we'll come back to them. Thanks a million, Niall.
Yeah, hi Fionnuala, and hi everyone. Yeah, I really hope my internet holds up here. Sorry about the tech difficulties there. Surprisingly for Germany, it's not. I don't know. I just thought moving here Wi-Fi would be better, but it's not. Yeah, I won't do my intro again, but just to say where I am and what I'm doing. I am Deputy Consul General at the Irish Consulate in Frankfurt. For those who don't know, that's basically an embassy in a country where we've kind of more than one embassy. So my background, yeah, I had cancer when I was a teenager. So the first tumor I had was in 2003 and the second was in 2005. And I suppose, yeah, like I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think this is common for a lot of teenagers, not specifically kids that had cancer or something like that, but I really didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to go to college, and I knew that I wanted to get on with my life in a general sense. I was listening to Lucy earlier on. I was probably very like your son in that all I really wanted to do was stop talking about being sick, having tumors, that sort of stuff. And I definitely didn't see myself as being in any way disabled or having a disability or anything like that. So definitely some stuff in common there. I think, yeah, the thing, like I didn't want to be the kid with cancer, because I think through school, and particularly when you've been in the same school, and Irish schools being the way they are, you do get a bit of a name. Like people just know, oh yeah, that's the sick kid, even when you're in like years later. So it does happen. I found out about there through my mum. So my mum, well, it was actually through Evelyn from Canteen, who I think is on the call as well. So everything that I'm about to say, Evelyn can take credit for. But yeah, my mum, I think, found out through Evelyn, and she gave me the form, was explaining what it was. And initially I had this reaction of like, no, I don't want to do that. Number one, I'm not disabled. And number two, I kind of felt like it was cheating or something like that. I had this attitude that like I didn't, if I wasn't going to do it the right way, the correct way, as I saw it in my head, why would I do it at all? But I think through talking to other people at the time who I knew that were going through the same process through Canteen, and also just through my mum as well, I kind of realized a few things. And well, I know now what I realized basically. I think having cancer really did affect my school experience in ways that I only realize now. I missed a lot of time, which is obvious, but also my well-being, like socially and mentally. Because of the fact I missed a lot of time, because of the fact that I had a very different experience, like worlds apart from anyone else in my school, it was quite difficult to make friends, I think. So, that does kind of isolate you. That has knock-on effects as well. Also, I didn't admit it at the time at all, but I did actually have visual impairments, and I do have one to this day. So that is now I can say I do actually have a disability. So, I think looking back now, I think there was nothing really to be concerned about there. But yeah, I think in the end, then when I was thinking about going to college, I put a lot of thought into like what I wanted to do. As I said, I wasn't really sure. So my CAO form ended up being pretty diverse. It was like English and politics, philosophy, journalism. Oh, I had some other crackers in there, but like basically it was a very diverse form. In the end, I ended up being about 10 points short for journalism, which is what I ended up getting offered. And I got in, and yeah, I think as Lucy was saying, like one of the big kind of takeaways for me was like, once you're in college, nobody knows about that unless you tell them. And I did tell some people for some reason in time, but like nobody really cares. It's not like you go around wearing like a special t-shirt or something like that. You control what you tell people, obviously. Yeah, and then I think I think then when I got to DCU, so I was doing journalism in DCU, I had an appointment with the disability officer, and I went down, and they did a lot of really practical stuff for me. Like they gave me a laptop with kind of software on it that would kind of help with my visual issues and different things like that. Also, they provided like a rest room because fatigue was a big issue for me at the time. And then the other really good thing they did was they had a chat with me around how to actually talk to people about what had happened to me or about disabilities. Or like, you know, for me, I have this thing where I can't see at certain angles. So sometimes I get a surprise where people are coming up on me, basically. So sometimes like actually saying to people, or another one is actually my balance, you know, and it's a classic college thing. So like even to this day, my balance is shocking. So sometimes I've looked like I've had a few drinks where I haven't. And through college, I didn't actually drink at all, but having to explain to people that no, you weren't actually drunk, and no, you should just let me into your nightclub or wherever it is, you know, having those conversations. So the access office were really good about that. And just talking through that was super helpful. And actually I found like later in life then and in my career now, it's still something I have to talk to people about all the time, whether it's colleagues or like sometimes I'll just be going to an event where something affects me in some way or another. And I might have to discreetly tell someone about, you know, my past history. So I think the experience of dealing with the access office in DCU probably helped me an awful lot in being able to articulate what happened to me and being able to explain the needs that I had at that moment. And that's just something that I've carried through. So that was probably the biggest thing looking back. Like I know the laptop was great and the restrooms were great, but that to me was critical. And it's a real, it's such a skill, a boon to have later in life as well. Yeah, then I suppose generally to talk about how I got on in college, yeah, pretty well usually. Like the thing was, as I said already, being able to actually choose who I could be was a big thing. I mean, you know, being able to go into university and say, all right, well, I can tell people whatever I want to tell. They don't know anything about me. It gave me a real sense of freedom, and I got involved in all sorts of different kind of societies and all that kind of stuff. And like, it was a really great time. I had an absolutely fantastic time in university. So then, yeah, and I think like, if I talk about their scheme generally, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here, by the way. I think another big factor is like, as a teenager with cancer, it's arguably even more difficult to know what you want to do as a teenager. The reason being, I think, is that you've just had less time to think about it. And sometimes because you've had less time to think about it, you can feel, or certainly I felt, more pressured to choose something. So to have the DARE program there, like, I think to have that route gave me a bit of breathing space in my Leaving Cert year. And I think like anyone who knows anyone going through the Leaving Cert will know that it's a big deal to have that. Yeah, so I guess that's it as well. Like, if I'm to talk about like how it set me up, so I really wasn't sure what university was or anything like that going into it. But I think the DARE program and being given the chance to actually study there and get involved in college in every way set me up. Then I liked it so much I went back and did a master's, and yeah, it also gave me great confidence, because knowing that I could go into university, I could do as well as anybody else and all that kind of thing. I don't know, it actually taught me a lot about the fact that, like, in work, in professional career, I could do what I wanted. And, you know, what happened to me as a teenager wasn't really going to hold me back in any way. My main message would be for people, if there's people on who are maybe considering applying and aren't sure and looking at the disability name and thinking if they qualify or not, just give it a go. It doesn't matter what you think at the moment. You will not regret it. You know, once you get there, as I said, nobody knows how you got there or really cares, to be honest, unless you tell them. There's all sorts of different access routes in university, I think it's worth saying. So you're not going to be completely on your own. It does help you get more independence. Completely echo what Lucy was saying earlier on. It's a huge thing for anyone who's been sick as a teenager to have some level of independence, and university is just the best way to do it. I suppose to finish up, like I think my message would be for people just to actually, as I said, give it a go, but believe that you deserve to get a chance to go to college just like everybody else. You don't know where it'll take you, and it will give you more opportunities than you actually realize. The route you go doesn't really matter. So I really would encourage anyone to give it a go. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Niall. Thanks so much. I actually studied journalism in DCU as well, and now I have a midlife career change to a consulate in my sights. So thanks. No, thank you so much for being so open and honest. I think that contribution would be so valuable to everybody who's listening, and really help them prepare to talk to their own kids and their young people about this and the benefits of it and what's possibly ahead for them. So thank you. Really appreciate that. In terms of chat comments, don't forget that you can use the raise hand function if anybody wants to speak. Laura, you can let me know if I've fallen behind, but I think there was only one question. Thanks a million, Declan, for putting answers in the chat. I think there was only one question about the impact of COVID that we didn't get to. So I don't know who on the panel wants to take this, maybe you, Declan, but Vicky had a question.
Yeah, I saw that. I just popped in a response there.
Oh, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So, so there's two ways of thinking about this. Like, there's how COVID affects individuals as applicants if they themselves have had COVID, but I assume that's not really the question. Really, it's around attendance in school for everybody. So the best way to deal with that is to discuss that in the school when there's filling in section B, which is the impact on education, and things like attendance and stuff like that. It's important to try as best as possible to identify what attendance has been due to an illness or a disability and what attendance has been due to COVID. So the applicants, last year's applicants, for example, have mentioned COVID in their applications, and that's fine. But it's not about whether or not they've had COVID themselves. It's more around how the school judges how they've been impacted if they've been largely at home, which obviously was more of a case last year. Just one other quick point in relation to Mary Claire's comment there about other disabilities. Just to give you some insight into how it works, you can apply with more than one disability, and even if you're applying in relation to tonight's talk as an applicant with cancer, if there's a second disability, put that in as well. The way the screening works for DARE is that if each disability type is screened separately, and the threshold is basically you only have to be DARE eligible once, and it doesn't matter whether it's your primary disability or your secondary one. It doesn't really matter which order you put them in. If you're not deemed eligible for your primary disability, you'll be referred on to a second assessment on the other disability type. And at the end of the process, there is a review of any applicants who've applied with two or more disabilities who might have still been deemed ineligible, and they're reviewed separately by another group. And then some of those are made eligible on the basis of cumulative impact on two or more disability types. And because of the various different speakers tonight, because of the nature of cancer, it can exacerbate the impact of other disability types or cause other disability types that might not be best evidenced by cancer specialists initially. So it's good to create that narrative, and the personal statement is a good place to do that. The best advice for filling in a personal statement is just tell a story from start to finish. So starting off by saying, I was diagnosed with such and such, or I became unwell with such and such around this time. It impacted me in this way, and this is what happened. A brief story of a couple of hundred words, really ties everything together. And and it's not judged itself in relation to the criteria, so people can be made eligible even if they don't write a personal statement at all. But it is a good idea to write it because it's an opportunity for the applicant themselves to tell their story and just stick to the main points and have a start, middle, and end in terms of what actually happened, and that really helps the application be assessed as a whole then at that stage.
Lucy, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the COVID piece that was mentioned there. And I suppose one of the things that I would encourage people to do would be to make the decision about whether your child is well enough to go into school based on what you're dealing with at the time. And if it's a case of they're immune compromised, they have a great tendency to pick up whatever's going and it impacts them a lot more, that's a decision to make, and then to look at how you put that into a DARE application that can be reflected in attendance at school. If you negotiate with the school as to why that's happening, that also adds to your case. I think sometimes as parents, we're very anxious to get our kids into school as much as possible, but sometimes it's a matter of you have to go up to the bed, scrape them out of it, carry them down and bring them into school when they're really not fit to be there. Like I know a few times I dropped Owen to school and it would have been a case I went back to collect him a half an hour later when he really wasn't able. So it's sometimes trying to make that judgment as to what's best for your own child and to look at it from that perspective too, if that helps.
Thanks, Lucy. So I think we're coming to a close. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just want to address Emer's comment on siblings, which, you know, obviously siblings are hugely impacted as well. And I suppose I'm thinking maybe that's the subject for a further webinar. You know, this is the first one that we've done. We certainly would like to do more. You know, there's so many topics to cover, and I think so much learning that we can all do from each other, and it's a valuable space to be able to do that. So yeah, so look, thank you very much to everybody for coming along tonight, to all of our panelists for your really valuable contributions and for your time. Thank you very much. And if anyone wants to, if you have any follow-up questions, just email us info@childhoodcancer.ie. Our website is childhoodcancer.ie. So, and you'll find us on all social media platforms. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to everybody, and hope to talk to you all soon.
Good night, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.